Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to some people who are out there. We are going to talk about one of the most perplexing but fascinating incidents that takes place in all of the Torah. I want to revisit the story of Nadav and Avihu. I think we've talked about this before, and I want to maybe review that and make some new comments. I also want to dedicate this shiur to the memory of Dina Oriah Bat Moshe Yehudit. Dina Isaacson, a young and very beautiful young lady who unfortunately passed away young this week. So it should be a zchut for her memory and aliyat neshama. So next week, by the way, some people have asked, we're going to say some words about Pesach. Yes, we will do that. I think next week we'll still have an opportunity to be online, and we'll devote that to some Pesach items that you can hopefully use for your Seder. Well, the story of Nadav and Avihu is unique in that it is the only time we see in the Torah, and I believe in all of Tanakh, where righteous people die in the prime of life. Mostly righteous people we see live a long life in the Torah, very long lives, century plus. Yet in the case of Nadav and Avihu, they are taken very young. So I want to try to review a little bit about some of the comments as to what they may have done wrong in order to prompt this heavenly decree or this heavenly fate of death. We're not even sure, by the way, exactly what kind of death they suffered. There is an opinion that they basically had spiritual burnout, that, as Rashi says, their neshamot died, but not their bodies. That's pretty difficult to understand because there is a whole elaborate discussion of the bodies being taken out, etc., and being approached by other Kohanim, who, of course, have to defile themselves in order to take care of the body, etc. So we're going to assume that they suffered a real death. And the rabbis are divided greatly about what they did wrong. The Torah says they brought Eish Zara Lifnei Hashem, a strange fire before God. Exactly what does that mean? So I'll review some of the different opinions as to what they may have done wrong. I will just only give you 8 of the many opinions about Nadav and Avihu. First of all, this idea of bringing strange fire. It may be that when it came time to offer the offering for the consecration of the Mishkan, this was on 1 Nisan, coming up in our calendar, and this was the dedication of the Mishkan. It was a very special day. It was a unique day, and they had karbanot that they were required to bring, but they may have brought a new karban that wasn't called for. They may have brought the same karban, which, by the way, focused around the ketoret. The ketoret is a very mysterious and potent part of the karbanot that there's a lot of different discussion about that. It's whoever brought it was to receive enough wealth to never have to work again in their life. We could find ketoret today, it'd be very popular. And one opinion is that in this ceremony, they added to it. Either they put in more ketoret than they were supposed to, or they added something to the ketoret that wasn't called for. It has a very specific set of ingredients, and you can't really tamper with it. And they did, according to this opinion. They may have brought the karban too early. Indeed, one of the opinions is that they lit the fire on the Mizbeach, and Moshe had said, no, the fire will be lit for the first time by fire that comes down from the heavens. It came down in the form, the Gemara says, of a crouching lion. And they were waiting for that to happen. And Nadav and Avihu said, well, we're not waiting. we're going to go ahead and we're going to make the fire ourselves. They went into the Kadosh Kadashim. So some say that was their sin, because only Aaron was authorized to go into the Kadosh Kadashim, and that only by specific decree of Hashem. Some want to say that they view things not necessarily connected with the Karban. One is Mor Lifnei Rabo, that they decided Jewish law in front of their rabbis being Moshe and Aaron. You can't really get more rabbinic than they are. And we have this principle that you may be intelligent, you may know something, but in front of your rabbi, you don't decide Jewish law, because there is a transmission of responsibility and accuracy that someone who comes before you knows more than you automatically. Now, you may be brilliant, but the transmission that comes from Har Sinai gets weaker in time. And so anyone who came before you is more qualified to answer a shaila than you are. Even today, you don't speak in front of your rabbi. It's disrespectful, but it's also deeper than that. It also may intimate that this generation knows more than the past generation. And it's not like that. In Talmudic terms, an Achron can never dispute a Rishon. Whoever comes before has precedence. And that's why if you were to ask the Rambam, who is greater, you or your teacher or your father? His father was his teacher. He would, of course, he'd probably give you a slap. In those days, it'd be a real slap. Today, it'd be a virtual slap, of course. Unfortunately, some of the greatest memories I have of my rabbis slapping me here and there. I wish they were around today to do that in any case. And he would say, don't be ridiculous. If you think that I know more than my father or my teacher, that's heretical. So no. And so one of the opinions is that they didn't ask these questions of Moshe and Aaron, but they decided in front of them, which they should not have done. Another two items, they were intoxicated. We see this because the next subject goes on teaching that Kohanim cannot be intoxicated when they do their brachot or their karbanot. We see this today reflected on Simchat Torah, when Kohanim do not bless the people at Musaf of Simchat Torah, because we're concerned that they had a drink and became inebriated during the intermission prior to Musaf. And so the tradition is that they don't duchen at Musaf. So they may have become intoxicated. Well, they were intoxicated, because that seems to be the impetus for giving this law, which is, by the way, given exclusively to Aaron. It's the only time in the Torah where it says, Vayidaber Hashem el Aaron lemor, and not Moshe. So clearly it's a reflection of what took place with his sons. And one final item, we were told, Banim lo hayu lahem. They did not have children. Now we'll come and try to understand that later, why that, how that goes along with what the other things we've said. But all of these various opinions are given in this very strange case of Nadav and Avihu, and trying to understand what it is that they did wrong. And there are more, by the way. I'm just giving you the top 8. So we have to add to the mix here that Nadav and Avihu were righteous people. How do we know they're righteous? Because Moshe Rabbeinu says it explicitly when he is comforting Aaron, and he makes this very, very strange statement in this phrase, Bikravai Akadesh, by those who are closest to me, I will be sanctified. And Moshe says, I knew that someone would have to pay the ultimate price in order for the Mishkan to be built and consecrated. And do not ask me why somebody would have to pay that price, because that's inexplicable. I do not understand it. I've asked some great rabbis, and they say they don't understand it either. It's probably the most obscure statement in the entire Torah, that someone would have to die for the Mishkan to be built. Where does that come from? Why would that be? In any case, Moshe states it, and he said it would have to be someone great, says Moshe to Aaron, and I thought it would be you or me. but it wasn't. It was Nadav and Avihu, and that shows they're greater than you or I. So Moshe says it explicitly. We also see, and I've often said this, that you can sometimes judge things by names. So we do name children Nadav, certainly. It's a fairly popular name, not so much Avihu, but there have been Avihus as well. The former head of the Israeli Air Force was Avihu. And so it's clear that Nadav and Avihu were righteous people, which only kind of even makes it more difficult. And try to understand, well, what is it? One other reference to their greatness, and this is and I've talked about this, I think, many times before, the statement Vayidom Aaron. When Aaron gets the news of the death of Nadav and Avihu, it says Vayidom Aaron. Either it means he's silent, he's paralyzed, he's at attention, he's immobile, whatever word you want to use. And most people think it's because he's grief-stricken. And that certainly was one of his emotions. But Rav Moshe Feinstein, in his famous book on the Parsha Darash Moshe, he explains it differently. He says, no, it wasn't just because he was grief-stricken. He was, but at the same time, he was feeling another emotion. And that emotion was based upon a vision that he was given, that in heaven, Nadav and Avihu were being greatly greeted with great pomp and circumstance by the angels, who were declaring that today among the most righteous people ever born are entering heaven. And so he sees that Nadav and Avihu are being given this tremendous kavod in Olam Haba, and so he doesn't know how to feel. He wants to cry out of grief because he's losing his sons. On the other hand, he's overjoyed that he's being given proof that they were tzaddikim who are at the highest level that a human being can reach. So not knowing whether to cry or to laugh, he does nothing. He's kind of pulled by these two emotions, and he says and does nothing. That's really Vayidom Aaron. Anyone who lo aleinu or lo alechem will lose a soldier in the war, in the IDF, not talking about other wars, but in the IDF, they will have the same mix of emotions. On the one hand, you're grief-stricken. On the other hand, you're very proud. Somebody who gave their life was Moser Nefesh for Am Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael. And so you do have this strange mixture of emotions. And that's the idea of Vayidom Aaron. So it's another indication that they were indeed very extraordinary and righteous people. So why did they die? And what is going on here? So I want to say that in a sense, the key is this phrase, Lifnei Hashem. They brought strange fire, Lifnei Hashem. We'll repeat this. By the way, the story of Nadav and Avihu is featured in a number of different parshiot in the Torah, not just Shmini. We'll see it elsewhere. Of course, in Achrei Mot, when it specifically refers to them, but elsewhere as well. So anytime the Torah is repeating an incident, clearly it has lasting significance. So the phrase Lifnei Hashem is repeated before Hashem. Now, this could mean that they did what they did in front of Hashem. And indeed, Rav Soloveitchik has a beautiful treatise and explanation, comments on Lifnei Hashem Titaru, that you are in God's presence on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and that's where you are purified by Hashem. So you really have this kind of intimate, private conversation with Hashem. But the word Lifnei Hashem can also mean not in front of, but before God. That is, they did what they did before. They considered themselves in some ways superior to God. They kind of butted in line, and they preceded God in doing things that Hashem had not told them to do, or Hashem was waiting to tell them. And that, I think, is what's going on here. All of these various reasons Chazal give, they have one common theme, if you haven't guessed it already. These were individuals who were so exuberant, so anxious and over-anxious and ecstatic about the consecration of the Mishkan, reaching spiritual heights, that they went beyond the borders. They pushed the envelope much further than it should have gone. And that's the common denominator of all the things they did. They couldn't wait for the fire to be lit, so they rushed in and lit the Mizbeach themselves. They wanted to add more to the Karbanot, to the Ketoret, when it really calls for a certain amount, but they said, let's, if one is good, two is better. We know that for those who are doctors out there, that a doctor may prescribe 2 pills every 4 hours, but you take 4 pills every 2 hours, you might think, well, I'm adding to it, so it's got to be better. Not necessarily. And that's what happens in many instances of halacha, and certainly with the karbanot. They, at one point, they actually were overheard talking to each other and, in a sense, wishing or hoping or waiting for their parents to die, which, of course, is a very mechutzav, it's very disrespectful thing, but in a sense, they couldn't wait to be in a position of leadership, spiritual leadership, where they would go even beyond what Moshe and Aaron were willing to do. They went into the Kadosh Kadashim. They were so, frenzied and so hyped up, hepped up to bring their karban. They entered places they shouldn't have entered. And that's why they became intoxicated, because when you become intoxicated, you can reach a higher level of ruach and of exuberance. Anybody who's ever been to Chabad Shul knows how there's no lack of alcohol flowing. And for that reason, if you ask them, why is there so much alcohol there? Because yain yisamach levav enosh, we say that wine or alcohol, it makes you happier, at least until you come down. And then they had no children. What does that have to do with anything? Because if you're going to be devoted 24/7 to spiritual activities, you don't have time for kids. You would have to help the good wife, and you don't want to take any time out of your spiritual activities in order even to do something as important as raising children. So they didn't have any children. And the Torah points that out specifically in another place. So all of these ideas, all of these things add up to the fact that, yes, they were righteous. Their heart was in the right place. They wanted to do the right thing. They wanted to go further than anyone had gone before, in a sense, in Star Trek language. And as admirable as that urge was, it wasn't proper. And the lesson, of course, from all of this, that it's great to be passionate, but be careful about being too passionate, because you can suffer this spiritual burnout. We want to impress Hashem, and we're so filled with this religious energy and ecstasy that we lose the perspective, and we think that these things will bring us closer to Hashem, but in reality, it ends up driving us further away from Hashem, and it injures us spiritually, because Hashem has the last and final say of this. And the bottom line is that Hashem wants us to lead normal lives. Yes, we definitely should be devoted to Hashem, but there's a limit to it. Every good impulse, every impulse has a limit. There are good and bad of every midah. Anger, yes, it's generally bad, but righteous indignation, when you see injustice, that form of anger, that's good. We say that being stingy is not positive usually, but sometimes it is not only appropriate, but necessary. Chasal mamonu shel chavera, with somebody else's property or money that you're managing, don't be so quick to give it away. It's not yours. Watch over it. Love is something that, of course, we think is the ultimate good, but too much love, let's say when you're raising children and giving into everything they do or want to do because you love them and smothering them with love, that's no good either. You have to, at some point, in a sense, back away. This is the famous comment of the Chafetz Chaim. He says that sometimes Hashem, when we think he's maybe he doesn't love us, but maybe he's like that parent that's trying to get his child to walk, the toddler. So he says, he stands at one side of the room and the child at the other, and motions for the child to come forward. And when the child, little by little, comes closer, the parent moves away and moves backwards. So the child will come even further and further and further in learning how to walk. And the child might think, why are my parents cruel? They're running away from me. I'm trying to get to them and they're going the other way. But really, of course, the parent is trying to train them to stand on their own 2 feet and be able to walk and to operate for themselves without always being helped. That doesn't build the independence, the self-confidence of a child. And so, in a sense, what Nadav and Avihu did, they came too close, that Hashem essentially was backing off and saying, you're too close. And you have to make some distance, and you can't do anything you want to do. But the bottom line is you have to be a well-rounded person, and you cannot so focus on any one thing that it's going to actually become counterproductive. And I think I've told this story before. I'll end with it in a moment, but I just want to say that we see throughout many comments of the sages, especially in Pirkei Avot, who say, yes, Yafet Talmud Torah, it's good to sit and learn Torah, but Yafet im derech eretz, combine it with a job, do something productive for the world. Too much of anything is no good. Sitting and learning is great, but don't be a one-dimensional person. Jews are meant to be multi-dimensional. All of the great sages, they all had jobs. I mean, Rashi, of course, he ran a vineyard, and Rambam and Sforno were physicians, and Hillel was an architect, and Chafetz Chaim with his wife ran a grocery store. My Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, he pursued a law degree. The Lubavitch Rebbe went to the Sorbonne and studied at philosophy in Europe. I have to think where. I think in Vienna, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, it'll come to me later. And so all of the great rabbis, they understood that if you're multidimensional, you'll have a greater view of the world, and you'll actually increase your spirituality and not decrease it. So the idea of being monolithic and doing only one thing, even if you think that's the greatest thing in the world, but it might be, too much chesed is also no good. And I want to just tell you this story, which I think is the ultimate story. And I've told it before, but it bears repeating. And it's a true story. I've seen it in several different places. It's about a family from Yerushalayim, a very prominent family. And one of their children, their son, ran away from home, and they couldn't find him. They finally were able to get word that he was in India, where a lot of Jews escaped to. There's a connection between Yehudi and Hodu somehow. In any case, so they hired this rabbi who was known to be kind of a deep programmer, and they said to him, please go on our behalf to India, find our son and bring him home. So he went to India. He found the boy, and he said, he began to give mussar to this boy. And he said to him, you know, if you were from a broken home, or if you were from an abusive home and you ran away, I could understand that. But your family is one of the most prominent and wonderful families in all of Yerushalayim. They're known far and wide. They're Baalei Tzedakah, they give charity, they are very intellectual, and they're absolutely unparalleled in the midah of hachnasat orchim, of welcoming guests. He says to the boy, there's not a single Shabbat or Chag where their Shabbat table is not filled to the brim with people, including strangers from right off the street, who they take in. So the boy looked at the rabbi and he said to him, yes, I know. And he said, that's my point. I'm trying to become enough of a stranger so that when they see me, they'll take me in and give me as much attention and as much love and care as they do the other strangers. The rabbi was shocked and stunned. He came back to Yerushalayim, he found the family, and he said to them, I want to tell you, I was with your boy. I was with your son. Do you want to have him come home? And they said, of course. That's why we sent you. He said, then let me give you one absolute must. This is Yarog Val Yavor. This you, under no circumstances, may alter. Are you prepared for that? And they said, yes. When he comes back, once a month at your home, there are to be no other guests or visitors under any circumstances besides your family, only your family. And if somebody comes to you 5 minutes before Shabbos and says, I'm hungry, I have nothing to eat, you drag that person to your neighbor or to somebody else, but you devote one Shabbos every month just to your family and make sure they understand that they're primary in your life. Sometimes even too much chesed is no good. Everything in moderation. And Nadav and Avihu, and for reasons that most people would say are admirable, they lost that somehow, and they went too far. And therefore, that kind of spirituality could not be maintained. It was too much. In a sense, it blew out the engine. And they were, yes, tzaddikim, and they would have a high place in heaven because their hearts were in the right place, but they weren't setting the example that Hashem wanted to be set in the Torah. And so we have to do whatever we do in moderation. Rav Moshe Feinstein was a great believer in this. And I'll just close with this one anecdote about him, that at his funeral, he was the great posek of the generation. There's been really nobody like him, just to the Sephardim Ovadia Yosef, but to Ashkenazim Rav Moshe Feinstein, he is the ultimate. And at his funeral, somebody got up to give a eulogy and said that he never spent one moment in secular activity. He was completely and totally immersed only in spirituality. Well, Rav Moshe Tendler, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, was listening to this, Rav Moshe's son-in-law, and he couldn't say anything, but he was seething. And he said, at the Shloshim, I'm in charge of conducting the ceremony, and I will set the record straight. And at the Shloshim, he got up and he said, Rav Moshe was in touch with everything in the world, and he was engrossed in many, many different disciplines. As a matter of fact, he said there was a kind of contest or competition every day to see who got to bring him the New York Times, which he read from cover to cover, including the sports section. And indeed, that was what made him such a great posek. He knew the world, and he was able to comment on things out of knowledge and familiarity and not out of ignorance. But the lesson, of course, is that you need to be a whole person, a well-rounded person. That's what Hashem is looking for. And that is not the model that Nadav and Avihu put forward, and therefore it could not continue. So it's a fantastic, I think, lesson for us in understanding how too much of a good thing ultimately is not very good at all. So I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. We're getting ready for Pesach. A couple of days, we'll have our annual Pesach book out, and we'll concentrate a little bit on Pesach next week. Same time, same place. Have a Shabbat Shalom, a wonderful Shabbat, and look forward to seeing you then.